evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I don't have any announcements to make. I'll give you a couple of observations. I'm here tonight. We were in the neighborhood, so I figured I'd stop in and catch a good game. Although I really do like being in Edmonton. Fans are great. The Ice District is fantastic. And if you remember, I lived here for a while as part of the bubble, and it's always great to be back. But what's also great to see in the city right now is this complex, the Ice District, has given people a place to come together and gather. It gives people in a city like all cities that has had to endure COVID for the last 2 years, a return to normalcy. And it's great to see that the Ice District has become such an important and vital part of Edmonton. Playoffs are off to a terrific start. We are result agnostic, but it's about having fun, entertaining, competitive games. And like the regular season, it's given us an opportunity to show the great skill and speed of our players. So it's all good, and I'm happy to take your questions.
When you're envisioning a new building, whether it was here or would be in other cities, how much does the overall vision, how much of an interest do you guys take in the overall vision as far as the surrounding area and the overall plan, as opposed to just the viability of the building and the finances of a building?
What I think cities have found, our clubs have found, and our fans have found, having a destination beyond just the arena itself is important. Having a place where people can congregate in large numbers, having a place where they can do other things in addition to go to a hockey game or a family show or a concert, having restaurants and sports bars, having hotels. It's all part of a vision that not only is good for the arena, but it's also an important part of the future of cities. And I think Mayor Mandel and Darrell Cates had a wonderful vision for this city and for the Ice District. I was involved somewhat in those negotiations, and it was clear to me that they both were committed to the future of Edmonton, which I think this Ice District represents in the best possible way.
I know it's very early, but there was talk coming out of the last set of meetings that officiating standards, you kind of wanted to keep, where they were in the postseason. What have you seen in the first few nights, and where do you think that's at?
The officiating typically becomes a story at some point in the playoffs in ways that it probably shouldn't. I think it surprises people to know that over the last 10 years, we've actually averaged more penalties per game in the playoffs than in the regular season. The standard is the standard. It's not a regular season standard. It's not a playoff standard. We continue, Stephen Walkham, Coley Campbell, continue to reinforce to the officials, we want you to call the NHL standard. And that standard is designed to emphasize speed and skill. And the officials are doing that. And our officials are critiqued, coached constantly. We use extensive technology in terms of showing clips, and we're looking for the consistent standard, and so far they're calling it.
The first couple of games, first couple of nights have been really physical affairs, lots of fights. Does that concern you at all, seeing so much physicality so early?
No, playoffs generally raise the level of intensity, tend to be a little bit more energetic. Not across the board. It's more a function of the games. And, what you don't see is what you saw decades ago of staged fights. When you see fights, they're generally emotions in the moment and the players responding.
Gary, the speed, the times of the games have sped up recently. Have you ever talked about having, like, if the games are supposed to start at 5 here, 7 o'clock Eastern, like it starts at 7, and then you could have the next game start on time? Because right now, games will start anytime. If it says 7:30, they're starting at 7:38, 7:48. Like, there's no real consistency in start times.
There's absolute consistency in stop sign. This is a format that everybody adheres to, and if you look at what we've been doing in these playoffs, is we start a game, a 7 o'clock game, typically starts at 7:08, maybe a minute off if there are two anthems being played, and then 7:38. We've been absolutely consistent.
Gary, Wayne Gretzky is doing ads for betting sites, so is Connor McDavid.
Yeah.
So obviously the NHL is on board with that, but the teams are not quite so on board with that when you ask them questions as to who's playing, starting goalies, who might not play because they're hurt. So the teams don't want to jump on board if you're going to bet on the games. Does the league want to reinforce to the teams, look, if we have these betting sites, we need you teams to be a little more forthright, like the NFL?
I think you're conflating two issues under the title sports betting. Sports betting has become a reality, and it's being embraced in terms of another way for the fans to connect with the game. But first and foremost, our clubs are functioning the way they think is best competitively, and that's the most important thing to us. We to the extent technology or sports betting wants to be a part of the game, it needs to adjust to the game. The game isn't going to adjust to them. And our teams will continue to do what they think is in their best interest in terms of the competitive issues that they deal with.
But the NFL lists who's definitely out and such before the game, so why won't the NHL do that?
The comparing sports, how often they play, the role of injuries, it's night and day. Our guys tend to play hurt on occasion, and we don't want to subject them to any additional potential injury.
Hi, Gary. There was a time where 16 of 21 teams made the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now you have 16 of 32. And obviously...
That was too many, and this is right.
Is it right? Because obviously this is a great scene, and it could be replicated in other cities. Other leagues are going to play it, and are you...
The reason this is as good as it is because the regular season and the playoffs are meaningful. Having half of our teams eligible, I think, is the right balance. I think it creates great competition throughout the regular season, makes the games most meaningful, and there's nothing like our playoff tournament. Stanley Cup is the hardest to win, and there's nothing in any sport like our first round.
So there's no talk of maybe having that play-in system like other leagues are kind of...
No. And in fact, if you look at our record in terms of number of games in the first round compared to others, we typically get more 6- and 7-game series. I think what we have now, and most people in our game think what we have now, is working quite well. Listen, I love the fact that people are so passionate about the game that there's always a debate about what we can change, okay? But change for the sake of change, or change because somebody else is doing it differently, under the right circumstances can make sense, but for us right now, we like where we are. We think the game's in really good.
With the, you guys have put a big focus back on divisional play, which I think is great. Fans love rivalries. In a situation like the East right now, where you have 4 from the Metro and 4 from the Atlantic, but they're crossed over, has there ever been a conversation, if it's 4 and 4, that we would just keep in our divisions for the first round?
We've had conversations about lots of things, but we like what we have. We're not looking to change something that we think is working very, very well.
Gary, you just over here, sorry. Yep. You started your conference today by talking about this arena and this area. I just wonder where Edmonton ranks, or what you think about the possibility of say, a draft or an all-star game here in the near future.
The answer to that is yes. We've had conversations about that on an ongoing basis, more when the ice district wasn't as fully developed as it is now. We've got lots of teams and cities that would like to host league events, but I can see bringing a draft and an all-star game here. It's just a question of timing.
And my other question would be, you probably know Edmonton has a pretty big player here in Connor McDavid. People want to know about him and all that. Would you categorize the way the league has tried to market him, and how, you know, would you like to do so going forward?
I think what I think has been the biggest focus, and Connor is on any short list you would talk about in terms of what I'm about to describe. Our game has never been faster, more skillful, or younger, and he represents our game from a skill standpoint and an excitement standpoint as well as anybody.
Gary, before things shut down, it seemed there was a fair amount of momentum for the league, the direction you were heading in and revenues and all that. When everything happened, a lot of uncertainty settled in about where it was all going to land. Now that we can reflect back a little bit on it, that it's back somewhat to normal.
Yeah.
How do you think it fared? And are you where you wanted to be? Are you ahead of where you thought you might be?
Well, we had, like everybody, an eventful 2.5 years. COVID was hard, not just on the NHL or hockey or sports, but COVID was hard for everybody. Had a very severe impact from a health standpoint, for many people from an economic standpoint. We made it a point to prioritize health and safety of our players, of our other personnel, and the communities in which we played. And we needed to be agile, we needed to be creative, and whether it was protocols or having a system to complete the 1920 season in bubbles, whether or not it was having to adjust last season where we played 56 games, started late, and we had to realign because we couldn't cross the border between Canada and the U.S., whether it was extending and modifying the collective bargaining agreement to deal with the realities of what was happening, because when we were playing, it was largely in empty buildings and a shorter schedule, whether it was having to negotiate 2 new media arrangements in the United States. There was a lot to do, and what we focused on was focusing on the tasks that needed to be accomplished and understanding what our options were, and then being agile enough to execute. Our franchises and our game have come through this strong. We will have record revenues this year. I think we'll have record ratings in the United States. And at the end of the day, our franchises and our game have come out of this as strong as possible. And that's how we have to be judged going forward.
I don't know how much you'll entertain this, but if you look back on the decisions that you made, and there were many of them along the way, is there something you'd point to and say, if I had a do-over, maybe we might do this instead? Were there lessons learned along the way that you can articulate?
No, I think we were doing what we needed to do at the time, and we were adjusting when we needed to adjust, particularly this season, when we had to reschedule 105 games. And we were able to do that. Now, in part, it was because one of the adjustments we had to make was determining that it didn't make sense for us to go to the Olympics. As much as we understood the players' desire to go, we couldn't have completed the season if we went on any timely basis. So I think, you know, the way you ask the question is, you know, how do I think? Ultimately, I think the ultimate team sport engaged in the ultimate team effort. The cooperation and the professionalism of the Players Association and the players, the way our teams responded, the support from ownership, the resources that were committed, all of it was part of the effort to get us through COVID. And I think as we all seek normalcy, we're just about there. Hopefully there won't be another variant that will mess things up, but we're pretty well back to normal. You know, we're a little bit later for the playoffs than we would normally be. But next season, we plan to start on time and finish a little bit earlier.
Gary, you're going back to Europe, and I know the European players really enjoy for some the opportunity to play the NHL in their home country. How realistic do you think it would be to ever expand full-time to Europe? Would you need almost a division of teams for that to be realistic?
Well, the travel, it's a great question, and the travel element is obviously first and foremost. But I think the state of hockey, particularly in Northern Europe, is very strong, and they have their own leagues. And, you know, we're not looking to start a division or take over hockey in Europe. To the extent we have games on television or other forms of media in 150 countries, to the extent we play exhibition or regular season games, it's to support hockey where it's doing very well and introduce new countries that may not be as familiar with the game. And so as we look at Europe, the plan is to have a regular presence, but to be supportive of hockey. We're not looking to undermine the established hockey that's very strong in particularly the Northern European countries.
And going closer home to North America, you've expressed interest that you want to help grow the women's game in North America, but not until they kind of figure out if they have a league. Do you have any update on that? Is that getting closer? Do you think that's a realistic situation in a year or so?
Well, I think it's been widely reported that I did convene both groups together to see if there was a framework that made sense for them to work together, because I think having a startup in an embryonic state that's very fragmented isn't going to be particularly successful. It would really be better if everybody was pulling on the same oars, and for whatever reason, the two organizations will not work together. And our attitude has been, well, okay, go do your own thing to the extent any of our teams want to take an interest and support it. But it's not an initiative that we're prepared at the league level to pursue, since there doesn't seem to be enough cooperation at the level where the effort's going on. So we're going to have to wait and see how things sort out. I hope they both make it. I hope at least one of them makes it. But I'm concerned about the viability under the current setup. Hey, Aline. How are you? Anybody else? Enjoy the game, and thanks for being here.